Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 28th day of June 2021. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, we've got first graphic we'll have is fire danger, and it's kind of improved out west due to not so much, of course, the wind making it work, but precipitation falling now back in the northwest coast, western Brooks Range, eventually over the north slope there, with a quarter to a half an inch falling around the Cape Lisburne area. Then farther to the south, Caltech picked up a quarter of an inch, for example. Russian Mission 0.2 of an inch. So the only high fire danger areas up there over the Yukon Flats again, with the extreme fire danger along the Porcupine and the upper Yukon River in the reddish area. And barely reaching high into the Fairbanks area, western Alaska Range, but didn't quite make the threshold there. Moving on to the hazardous weather graphics, we've got a flood watch continues. Let's see, that's continues through Thursday, and that is, a flood watch continues through Tuesday night, and that's the northern inner channels there, the Panhandle, and then there's a flood advisory out for the Chilkat River for flooding that's occurring along the Porcupine Road, and that's out through Wednesday night. Otherwise, up to the northwest with the heavy rain expected to move in fact, looking for 2 to 3 inches of rain to fall there, Kobuk Valley, Noatak Valley, and the western North Slope, western Brooks Range, along mountain areas over the next couple of days. So there's a flood watch out due to the expected rainfall there that's out through Thursday for that shaded area, and strongest winds will probably be occurring from now through tonight and then dying off. Otherwise, today another hot day over the southern Panhandle, especially actually warm across the entire southeast coast with a lot of sunshine, but Hyder and Shelter Cove both at mid-afternoon had a high temperature of 95 degrees, while Klawock and Whale Point checked in with 91 degrees. Metlakatla there, very unusual 87 degrees Fahrenheit, and then up to the north, Hoonah and Juneau 81, not so unusual for low 80s there in those locations. Definitely unusual for Shelter Cove and Hyder to have 95 degrees or anywhere in the 90s there over the southern Panhandle. And moving on to the satellite imagery, you can see the clear skies. I thought the mid-90s were high in the southern Panhandle. It was like 115 in Portland today, and even higher in some locations down there. And that all associated with that big upper level ridge over British Columbia. And that's starting to break down a little bit and start getting some more cooler air in from the west into the Panhandle. It's looking for a cooling trend. Actually, some moisture will be slipping on up, bringing a chance of showers or thunderstorms in toward the Hyder-Stewart area. That'd be tomorrow and tomorrow afternoon. Otherwise, clouds, rain, cool temperatures in the 50s, mid-50s. Rainfall amounts, actually a thunderstorm near Paxson, and they picked up about half an inch of rain this afternoon with that thunderstorm. And isolated thunderstorms also over the Cobourg Southwest Mountains there, north of Dillingham, Auckland, Buckland Mountains. And we've got a system out over the Bering Sea, bringing gusty winds 35 miles an hour to Nikolsky with some light rain there. Only about 1/10 of an inch falling the last 12 hours at Adak, and rainfall amounts not all that impressive, but it'll probably end up resulting in some gale force winds. Cold Basin gusts 30 to 35 miles an hour. That'll probably increase in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range tomorrow and tomorrow night. Otherwise, system dropping down from the Arctic, really affecting the west and northwest Arctic coast. Pretty strong winds. Cape Lisburne, peak wind gusts 58 miles per hour. And Point Thompson airstrip off to the east there had gusts to 53 miles an hour, or Barter Island about 35 miles an hour. But pretty good winds all across the area there, with even 25 mile an hour winds down around the Seward Peninsula, or 25 to 35 mile an hour wind gusts to the Seward Peninsula. And rolling that through again, you can see still that south to north flow of moisture, but really pretty minimal until it makes landfall there. Cordova picked up about, Cordova and Valdez both had about 1/4 of an inch of precipitation in the last 12 hours today, and that moisture is slipping on up about the same amounts into the Copper River Basin. The exception being Paxton with that thunderstorm picking about half an inch. Otherwise, just a few hundreds getting north of the Alaska range there. And that kind of dividing the hot air mass to the east and southeast to the cooler one back up over mainland Alaska. Otherwise, you can see the system up to the north very vividly with the bright band of clouds there over the western North Slope, Brooks Range area back across Wrangell Island. And then the weaker front there approaching the Fox Islands, low pressure back just west of AKwx, will be kind of maintaining its strength, not moving too much, drifting eastward. The front will really weaken on Wednesday from what it will be later tonight and tomorrow. That's the position of the front currently over the central Aleutians, rain spreading at the Fox Islands, definitely in the increase in the winds there. Showers, thunderstorms, temperatures in the 50s across southern Alaska today, a little warmer up north of the Alaska range. You can see the breaks there, upper Yukon Valley, especially as you head northeast, but solid sunshine, hot over the Panhandle again, windy, wet over the North Slope, especially the western Arctic coast. And for tonight, that front remains stationary, westerly flow. It's kind of lying parallel to the wind flow, so it won't be making a southward push. So we'll just see frontal action along the North Slope there and the Brooks Range, and to a lesser extent the Arctic coast the next couple of days. That's why there's a flood watch out for the western Brooks Range and the Noatak Valley, Kobuk Valley for 2 to 3 inches of rain due to the stationary nature of the system there. Showers, isolated thunderstorms along the Alaska Range, Copper River Basin, 40-mile country, dry for the Panhandle. Look for cooler temperatures, more ocean air coming in over the next couple of days. Rain and wind, Fox Islands, light rain, fog, drizzle, IFR for the southwest coast tomorrow, and low pressure hangs in over tonight, Tuesday, low pressure hangs in over the central Bering Sea. Tightening gradient, gale force winds for the Alaska Peninsula, call it 40 knots, and small craft advisories for the Pribilofs with periods of rain and fog. And again, isolated thunderstorms, Copper River Basin, Wrangell Mountains, maybe eastern Alaska range. Less shower activity, though, south central Alaska, maybe more clearing, Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula, maybe Cook Inlet in the southwest interior. And rain continues for the up there north from the Kobuk, Koyukuk Valley, Kotzebue, northward to the Arctic coast. And then on Wednesday, that system weakens considerably. Went a little too far there, as you can see, as it presses into the Alaska Peninsula. And that frontal boundary still hung up there over the North Slope and the Brooks Range, but the precipitation field a lot lighter than it was, not as heavy and dry over the Panhandle, but cooler temperatures and more sunshine. Southern Alaska lows tonight, 40s to lower 50s, but notice the Arctic coast, central Arctic coast, they're dropping into the upper 20s to near 30. And for the highs tomorrow, much cooler. Notice the Panhandle there, lower 70s for your highs, down about 20 degrees from today, and then up higher for the Susitna Valley, and upper 30s for the Arctic coast, back down a shade below freezing for the central Arctic coast the following morning, otherwise 40s, 50s everywhere else. Highs 70s over the interior, mid 70s, Copper River Basin.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Through flying weather graphic Tuesday morning, some IFR eastern Beaufort Sea coast, also the western Brooks Range down across the Noatak Valley, and the northwest coast to near Kotzebue, and then IFR Seward Peninsula down south and southwest along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast into Togiak Bay, Bristol Bay, much of the Bering Sea, all of the Aleutians, and a good portion of the Alaska Peninsula, southwest Kodiak Island. That extends eastward into the eastern Gulf of Alaska, northward to the eastern North Gulf coast to near Valdez, and then up across the Wrangell Mountains, marginal VFR along the Alaska Range and the White Mountains, and increasing clouds and IFR along the coastal areas of the Panhandle. Then for the afternoon, Tuesday, we've got marginal VFR, western part of the southeast coast, IFR, Yakutat down along the north and central coast. Scattered marginal VFR over the mountainous terrain of southern Alaska, Alaska Range, and then that increases as you head north and west with IFR south side of the Seward Peninsula, southern slopes of the central western Brooks Range, Noatak Valley, northwest coast, marginal for the North Slope and Arctic coast, and lots of IFR out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. AKwx may go marginal. There may also be some VFR showing up on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. And then for the Wednesday morning outlook, IFR kind of creeps back in across southwest Kodiak Island, marginal VFR up across Fognak Island. Otherwise, just scattered marginal VFR, southern Alaska, up in toward the eastern Brooks Range, but definitely a lot more solid, especially with the IFR, Arctic Coast, North Slope, and the southern slopes of the Brooks Range. Most of the Bering Sea once again, and the Aleutians, all IFR, marginal along the coast into Togiak and Bristol Bay. IFR, Alaska Peninsula, especially on the Pacific side, and IFR on the Panhandle, mostly along the coast up to Yakutat. Marginal VFR now, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay down to about Juneau, but remaining VFR to the south. And then for the afternoon, marginal VFR western Panhandle and the eastern North Gulf Coast. VFR, southern Alaska, mostly. Looks like some marginal VFR for the Auckland, Buckland Mountain areas and maybe the Wrangells. Otherwise, Yukon River pretty much open, but north and west, marginal VFR there for the North Slope Arctic Coast and IFR southern slopes of the western Brooks Range and Bering Strait. Marginal VFR for the Fox Islands and Atka, becoming VFR for Bristol Bay. And for the passes, Anatuvik tomorrow, IFR, and split the difference there, Adigan go marginal VFR. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, call it marginal VFR at times throughout the day, but rainy, starting out marginal, becoming VFR in the afternoon. And for windy, marginal VFR trending toward VFR, or will become VFR in the afternoon. Isabel, I'm going to go mostly VFR tomorrow optimistically, and then Mentesta mostly marginal pessimistically. And then for Tanita, marginal VFR to VFR. And Portage, also marginal VFR to VFR. And Chilkoot and White, one more VFR day for those passes, Chilkoot and White, and the Northern Panhandle. Otherwise, freezing levels, still got that warm air mass tomorrow morning over the Panhandle there, but starting to give way with 12,000 feet to 16,000 feet over towards Stewart and Hyder, very high. And then 6,000 to 8,000 feet over the interior. And then 2,000 feet reappears there, central Arctic coast, with that upper polar vortex scooting by to the east, and 4,000 over the west central Aleutians. Icing, we've got some moisture coming northward, a fair amount there coming into the eastern Aleutians for some considerable moderate rime icing, and then a lot less of that up toward the Pribilof. Scattered mixed icing threat here, southern Alaska, Copper River Basin, and the Alaska Range, and some moisture sliding up, catching the from Dixon Entrance there, the southeastern part of the Panhandle, say from a net over towards Stewart and Hyder, chance of some icing, and then with the frontal boundary up there along the Brooks Range and the North Slope. And taking a look at the jet stream, you can see associated with that band of moisture, we've got westerly flow, 65 to 85 knots, light in the interior down to the Gulf of Alaska, southeast 70 western Aleutians, and then southerlies. Now that southerly jet edging eastward as the ridge starts to break down, so 105 knots there into the northern Panhandle, and at 3,000 or 9,000 feet, 35 to 40 knot winds over the eastern Aleutians, and up to 65 knots approaching the Alaska Peninsula. And then turbulence, moderate chop, Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, shimmy at 2, also areas of the Brooks Range east and west.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Carrie Haisley, Chief of the Emergency Services and Multimedia Branch for the National Weather Service in Anchorage. With me today I have Dr. Doug Wesley, a physical scientist for the National Weather Service Alaska Region Headquarters. Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Carrie. Hello.
Hello. So you're here to talk to us a little bit about something called AKwx, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And I understand that AKwx is a network of volunteers who take weather observations. Can you tell us a little bit more about what AKwx is?
Yes, it began in the lower 48, 20 some years ago, and it's expanded during those 2 decades. They're getting something like 10 to 15,000 rainfall reports per day from the lower 48.
Wow, that's a lot of different reports. So how many reports do we get in Alaska right now?
Well, it varies, maybe 10 to 25. But if you consider the large areas we're talking about, we have a lot of gaps to fill. Any observation is better than no observation, but there are large areas in Alaska. Alaska covers 3 million square miles. There's a lot of data gaps in that space, so we'd like to enhance it.
Sure. So tell us then a bit about why these observations are so important to Alaska and why we need to expand the number of them that we're getting.
Yes, Alaska, as you know, has large areas with a lot of complex terrain, and there are no weather observing stations or radar. So CoCoRaHS can help fill the data gaps, so you can at least get some idea of what's actually falling from the sky at those locations. CoCoRaHS increases the amount of timely weather observations available to meteorologists and other decision makers, especially in hazardous type of weather, both rain and snow and the occasional hailstorm that we get up here. CoCoRaHS observations can help forecasters identify long-term precipitation and snowfall trends in a climate sense. And just overall, they increase the amount of timely weather observations available to the public.
So then let's talk a little bit about each of the different types of observations. So it's the rain, hail, and snow network. So let's start by talking a little bit about rain observations and tell us a little bit about how you take those and how long it takes a volunteer to get a rain observation.
Okay, this is a 4-inch gauge, just the basic gauge, which you use for both rain and snowfall. But the rain observations are pretty quick. It's a matter of 2 or 3 minutes that each volunteer goes out and takes a reading, and then they enter these on the computer, and they're immediately available for observation on the computer and on the maps, so that you can see your report. In the wintertime, it's a little bit more complicated. We require the observers to measure not only the snow accumulation, but also liquid equivalent. So they've got to melt the snowfall. This involves 2 of these gauges and a snowboard. And it's maybe a 10-minute observation per day during the winter. But the snowfall is so variable that even across town and in especially the remote areas, it's crucial that we increase this number of snow observations in the network.
Right. I understand that we can only take observations in places where we have weather service offices. And so we rely on all of these volunteers to help us fill gaps. And it's also interesting to know how snowfall varies across like large spaces or even small cities. So I notice here in Anchorage, for example, we can have a vastly different amount of snow on the east side of town and the west side of town. And so it seems like these observations would help us to better understand what's going on in places besides just where the office is.
That's correct. In any given snowfall, there are typically large variances, as you know, and we rely on reports from the public and from National Weather Service cooperative spotters to map out the snowfall that occurs so that we can predict it better in the future.
Sure. So we talked about rain observations and we talked about snow observations, and you said for each of those, if it's rain, it only takes a couple minutes, and then it can take about 10 minutes if it's snow. Hail was the other one that we didn't talk about yet. Tell us just a little bit about the hail observations that CoCoRaHS observers take.
Yeah, the CoCoRaHS network, it has a hail pad, and it's just a simple block of styrofoam covered with aluminum foil, and you can approximate the size of hail by measuring the dent that the hail causes on the pad. And this can give us an estimate of hail size. We don't get hail very often in Alaska, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times in my 5 years in Anchorage, and some of it up to a ½ inch. And I'm sure there's been larger hail up in the interior at times.
So let's talk a little bit about how these rain, hail, and snow observations can help forecasters. So we have people who forecast the weather, and we also have people who work on the hydrology side, and I can see that maybe CoCoRaHS will be beneficial to both of them. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's beneficial to the hydrologic forecaster who's concerned about flooding, and rainfall comprises one of the causes of a flood, or it can exacerbate high water conditions. So the more the hydrologist has to look at in terms of data from recent rainfall, the more information they have to work with when they're generating a forecast. The weather forecasters in the wintertime at the Weather Service office can use these observations also to help with past case studies, to verify model data, and to get a handle on what's actually happening out the window. And that's important in the forecast process.
Yeah, it seems like you can never have too much information when you're issuing a forecast. So it only takes a few minutes most of the time to take these observations. So let's say I'm interested in becoming a volunteer for CocoRaz. How do I get involved?
Yeah, the website is very useful, cocoraz.org, and it has a number of video-based training tutorials that take you right on from measuring rainfall to a video tutorial on measuring snowfall. It has the maps available in real time, and you can go back and look at that old data too through those maps. And so it's a very useful, comprehensive website.
Very interesting. And anybody can get involved, right? You don't have to be a meteorologist.
That's right. And, we love to have 24, once a day reports throughout the year, but if you can't, then so be it. And we have observers, some observers are out of town for periods of time, or maybe they can only report, a week or two of precipitation, but it's still useful. It's still data that we look at. So the more the better, but you can get involved even if you aren't at a location 24/7.
Doug, I really appreciate you coming on to our program today to talk about CocoRaz. Hopefully we can have you back in the studio at some point so we can talk more about it and then talk more about the different types of observations and the tools that observers use.
That would be great. Yeah.
So thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining this edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the segment. Sea ice analysis today, not much different from yesterday. Of course, no more ice around St. Lawrence Island or through the Bering Strait, basically, and still a narrow band of leftover shore fast there along the northwest coast on down in toward Kotzebue Sound. Otherwise, not a lot of change with the gusty winds up there from the west and southwest. Obviously, that'd push the ice pack. The main ice pack would drift off to the east-northeast. And for the coastal water forecasts, we've got, there we go. Variable winds 15 knots, central and northern inside waters tomorrow, 3 to 4 foot seas. For Clarence Strait, northwest at 20, seas 4 feet. Small craft advisories on the south coast, north to northwest, 30 knots with seas around 10 feet. 25 knots on the north coast from the northwest, 8 foot seas. 20 knots on the extreme north coast from the west-northwest. And then for Wednesday, west-northwest 15 knots up north there. And the central coast, northwest 20 to 25 knots, seas 8 to 10 feet. And the south coast, 25 knots out of the northwest along Prince of Wales Island. Inside waters, variable winds at 10 knots with slight seas. And for Tuesday, Cook Inlet, southwest breeze 10 to 15 knots, 3 to 4 foot seas. Prince William Sound, light westerlies with slight seas, 10 knots for the speed. And 20 knots from the west for the Middleton Island area. Western North Gulf Coast, small craft advisories. Same thing for the Barren Islands, small craft advisories. Westerlies expected in those locations, up to 25 to 30 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. And then for Wednesday, Cook Inlet, south to southwest, 15 to 20 knots, 4 to 5 foot seas. Small craft advisories, Kamishak Bay, south winds at 25 knots. And the Barren Islands, south winds 20 knots. West-southwest from the North Gulf Coast at 20 knots with 6 foot seas. Prince William Sound, south winds 15 knots and 2 foot seas, 2 to 3 foot or 1 to 3 foot for the sea heights there. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 25 knots, small craft advisories, and 5 to 7 foot seas. Alaska Peninsula, southeast winds 30 knots with 4 to 6 foot seas. Bristol Bay looking pretty light tomorrow, south at 10 with 2 foot seas. And then those pick up on Wednesday, just under gale force. Will go southeast for Bristol Bay at 30 knots, and good gales for the Alaska Peninsula, southeast 40 knots, 9 to 18 foot seas. Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, small craft advisory, southwest at 25, east side of the island there, south at 20. And then for on Alaska Island, gale warnings, east-southeast winds tomorrow, 35 knots, 8 to 12 foot seas. Unmak Island, small craft advisories, east, 30 knots. Lighter winds there west of Nikolsky, Adak, Atka, all the way out to Amchitka, 15 knot winds from the east or northeast. And then Kiska to Shimia, small craft advisories, north winds 25 knots. And for Wednesday, northwest 30 knots, 10 foot seas for Kiska to Shimia. Gale warnings for Amchitka Island, northwest 35 knots, and 30 knot winds in the forecast for Adak and Atka with seas around 12 feet. Unimak Island, south winds 30 knots, seas as high as 15 feet. And 30 to 40 knots southerlies for Unalaska Island, with the gales on the north shore, or the north side of the island there, with seas as high as 20 feet. And for the southwest coast, look for southeast winds at 15 knots along the coast tomorrow across Nunivak Island. 3 to 4 foot seas. Pribilof's tad stronger, southeast 20 with 7 foot seas, but back down to 10 knots for St. Matthew Island, northern Bering Sea. There are small craft advisories out for St. Lawrence Island for 25 knot sustained winds from the south and seas at about 8 feet, southwest 20 for Norton Sound. Those become east or variable at 10 knots for Norton Sound, east 20 knots St. Lawrence Island, and 30 knot easterly winds from the Yukon Delta coast all the way out across the northern Bering Sea, including St. Matthew Island, southeast 30 for the Pribilofs. Gale warnings for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, south of Nunivak Island, southeast 35, 11 foot seas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, or central and eastern coast, or actually the entire stretch of the coastline, call it westerly, 10 to 20 knots, and then from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, northeast at 20, but gale warnings, Cape Thompson to Wales, southwest, 35 knots. And for, Wednesday, light westerly, central and east side on Wednesday for 5 to 10 knots, north 10 on the western Arctic coast, 15 to 20 knot winds from Cape Beaufort to Wales. And for tonight again, front keeps it windy, wet. The flood watch out. 2 to 3 inches of rain expected over the northwest interior, western Brooks Range and along mountain areas. And gusty winds tonight, rain and gale force winds into the Fox Islands, and showers, isolated thunderstorms, southeast interior. Cooler tomorrow for the Panhandle, chance of showers or thunderstorms down south, as well as the Copper River Basin. Gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula subside on Wednesday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.